Jake Palmer walked into the diner, soaked from head to toe, and exactly 5 minutes late. He barely managed a single breath before being fired on the spot, right in front of dozens of customers sitting in silence, witnessing everything. No one said a word. No one dared to intervene. Jake also had no idea that the strange man he had saved in the pouring rain the night before was also there. The man sat quietly in the corner, silently observing every cruel word being hurled at him. And when that man stepped through the doors of Riverbend Diner, in just a single moment, every vicious remark the manager had thrown at Jake would come back to haunt him for the rest of his life. But before we get to that part, let me tell you the story from the very beginning. Those seemingly small moments that ended up changing the lives of two people forever. If you enjoy emotional stories and unexpected twists like this, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss any part of it. So what exactly happened on that rainy night? And why did it lead Jake to this fateful moment? The storm that night was brutally unforgiving, with raindrops as heavy as sledgehammers pounding against the windshield of the old Ford pickup. Jake Palmer gripped the steering wheel tightly, the sleeves of his white uniform shirt still damp from the coffee spill earlier that evening. The wipers worked at full speed, screeching with an irritating rasp, yet they only allowed him to see a few meters of road ahead. 11 at night. Riverbend Diner had closed late today because a tour group had stopped by at the last minute. Jake had served them with his usual friendly smile, even though his mind kept wandering to his 6-year-old daughter waiting at home with the neighbor. Lydia was probably asleep by now, but even so, he needed to check if everything was all right. This week, his paycheck would be just enough to cover the rent, as long as nothing unexpected came up, as long as the car didn't break down, as long as Lydia didn't get sick. Too many ifs in the life of a single father. Jake sighed and rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. 2 years. It has been 2 years since Sarah passed away in a car accident. 2 years of being both mom and dad, juggling bills and rocking his daughter to sleep when she cried for her mother. Sometimes he wondered if he was doing enough, but he could only keep going. The headlights cast their beam forward, illuminating the rain-soaked oak trees lining the road. The drive home through the Cincinnati suburbs was empty at this hour. Too empty. So empty that when he noticed something strange ahead, his heart thudded harder. A shiny black sedan sat crooked on the roadside, its hazard lights blinking weakly through the thick curtain of rain. The hood was wide open, thin streams of smoke drifting upward before dissolving into the cold wind. And standing beside the car was an older man with silver-gray hair plastered to his head, his black suit soaked through, one hand gripping the side of the car for balance. No umbrella, no help. Just an old man staring down at his phone, his face tight with worry beneath the dim sweep of the headlights. Jake hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly on the slick pavement. His rational mind whispered, "It's late. Lydia's waiting at home. This is a deserted road. You don't know who he is." But then he saw the man's shoulders trembling, saw his fingers struggling with the phone screen, only to find no signal in this area, saw a human being who genuinely needed help. Jake remembered the night Sarah had her accident. Had someone stopped to help her? Had someone stayed with her during those last minutes? He would never know the answer, but he knew he wanted to be that person for someone else. He pulled over and lowered the window halfway. The smell of wet asphalt and engine oil drifted into the cab. "You all right, sir?" His voice carried through the sound of the rain. The man jerked slightly and turned, squinting through the water. On his wrinkled face was a mix of astonishment and the guarded caution of someone suddenly seeing light in the dark. "My car died," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "No tow truck is answering, and I think I got lost." Jake studied him for a moment. The suit, expensive but now soaked. The polished leather shoes are now covered in mud. Clearly a successful man, but right now he looked no different from a helpless old soul stranded in the storm. Jake opened the door. "Get in. Another few minutes out here and you'll freeze." Franklin Spencer stood in the rain, staring at the beat-up pickup and the young man inviting him inside. Every life lesson about caution around strangers echoed through his mind. Who was this man? Why did he stop? Was this safe? But then a cold gust blew past, making him shiver violently. His wetsuit clung to his skin, his shoes icy with water. His phone still had no signal. It had been 45 minutes since the breakdown, and not a single other car had passed. Maybe sometimes people simply had to trust the kindness of strangers. Franklin stepped forward, opened the door, and slid into the passenger seat. Water dripped from his clothes onto the worn leather, leaving dark patches. Inside, the temperature was warmer thanks to the old heater humming at full power. "Thank you," Franklin said, his voice still trembling. "You didn't have to—" "No one lets an old man melt in the rain," Jake cut in, his tone gentle but tinged with humor. "I'm Jake Palmer." "Franklin Spencer," the man replied, extending a hand. His hand was ice-cold, but the handshake was firm. Jake pulled the truck back onto the road. Rain hammered the roof in a steady rhythm, almost hypnotic. In the small cabin, the two strangers sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence where you're not sure what to say, but also don't feel uncomfortable. "Where were you heading before the car broke down?" Jake asked, without shifting his eyes from the road. "A meeting, out of town. It ended later than expected, and then I got caught in this storm." Franklin sighed. "I thought I knew a shortcut. Turns out it was the long way." "GPS lies sometimes," Jake said with a small smile. They drove through the empty suburban streets, where the streetlights flickered weakly. A few houses still had lights on, but most were dark. This wasn't a fancy neighborhood, just small apartments and old row houses, but there was a certain warmth in how people lived here. Jake stopped in front of a 3-story apartment building with faded cream paint. "This is my place," he said. "There's no hotel nearby at this hour, and it's still pouring out there. You can stay the night. I'll call a tow truck for you in the morning." Franklin stared at him, surprised. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a burden." "I have a good sofa," Jake said, firm but kind. "Better than you staying in my truck all night." They stepped inside, stomping water off their shoes. The apartment was small, a combined living room and kitchen, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. But everything was tidy and clean. On the wall hung photos of a smiling little blonde girl. On the coffee table were building blocks, picture books, and a pink plastic cup. "My daughter Lydia," Jake explained when he noticed Franklin looking. "6. She's asleep in the bedroom." Franklin nodded, warmth spreading through him. This young man hadn't just stopped to help a stranger. He had brought that stranger home, where his daughter slept. That was a level of trust Franklin rarely saw in this city. Jake handed him a towel. "You can use the bathroom first. I'll find some dry clothes for you." When Franklin stepped into the small bathroom, the mirror fogged by steam, he caught sight of himself. A drenched old man, looking pitiful. But in his eyes, he saw something he hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine emotion stirred by an act of kindness. 20 minutes later, Franklin sat on the sofa wearing Jake's oversized athletic clothes. In his hands was a steaming bowl of instant soup, its aroma filling the small room. Jake sat on the chair beside him, holding his own bowl, but he looked exhausted from the long day. I truly appreciate this, Franklin said sincerely. Not everyone would do what you just did. Jake shrugged. Just doing the right thing. But not everyone does the right thing, Franklin said pointedly. Especially these days. They were quiet for a moment, the rain now softer against the window. Franklin took a sip of soup, then asked, "What do you do, Jake?" "Waiter at Riverbend Diner," Jake replied. "Been there 4 years. Not a dream job, but it pays on time and lets me spend time with my daughter." "And your wife?" Jake fell silent, sadness flickering across his eyes. "She passed away 2 years ago, car accident. Since then, it's just me and Lydia." Franklin felt something tighten inside his chest. "I'm very sorry." "It's all right," Jake said, though his voice wavered. "We're learning to keep going. Lydia, she's everything." Franklin looked at the young man, tired face, yet still a light in his eyes. He had lost his wife, raised a child alone, worked tirelessly, yet still stopped to help a stranger in the rain. That was the kind of person Franklin hadn't seen in a long time in his ruthless business world. "And you?" Jake asked, shifting the topic. "What do you do?" Franklin hesitated. He was used to introducing himself with titles, companies, and achievements, but tonight, none of that felt important. "I'm in business," he said simply. "Own a few companies. Had a meeting about a new deal today." "Sounds important." "It is," Franklin nodded. "But I'm starting to realize that sometimes the most important things aren't the numbers or the contracts." Jake smiled faintly. "Lydia teaches me that every day." They talked for a while longer, small stories about life, struggles, and simple joys. Franklin spoke about how he had been so busy that he forgot what connection felt like. Jake told him about Lydia learning her first letter, about how she asked why her mom never came home. When the clock struck 1 in the morning, Jake stood. "You should rest. I'll get you a blanket." "Jake," Franklin called softly. "Thank you. Not just for helping me, but for reminding me that good people still exist." Jake nodded, warmth in his eyes. "Sleep well, Mr. Spencer." When Jake woke at 5:30 a.m., the sky was still dark. He was used to waking early. He needed to prepare breakfast for Lydia before school, then get to the diner for the morning shift. He tiptoed into the living room, careful not to make noise. But the sofa was empty. The blanket is neatly folded. And on the coffee table, a small note lay waiting, handwritten, "Jake, thank you for seeing me as a human being, not a burden or a frightening stranger. Last night, you reminded me of values I had nearly forgotten. I will never forget this kindness. Franklin Spencer." Jake smiled softly and tucked the note into his pocket. He didn't think much about whether he would ever see the old man again. It was simply a good deed done, and life would go on. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours, Franklin Spencer would walk into Riverbend Diner. And everything would change. That morning, everything seemed to go wrong from the moment Jake opened his eyes. Lydia woke up with a soft cough, her face flushed. Jake placed his hand on her forehead, warm, but not enough to be considered a fever. She insisted on going to school because there was an art test that day, and she'd been practicing for all week. "Dad, I can draw the horse really well now," Lydia said, her eyes sparkling. "I can't miss it." Jake sighed, brushing his daughter's hair. "All right, but if you feel unwell, you have to tell your teacher, okay?" After dropping Lydia off at Mrs. Wilson's house, the kind neighbor who helped Jake watch Lydia every morning before the school bus arrived, Jake drove back toward the diner. But that was the day the old Ford decided to turn on him. It sputtered, coughed a few times, and then died. "No, no, no," Jake tapped lightly on the dashboard. Don't do this to me today." 15 minutes and countless attempts to restart it later, the engine finally turned over. But now, Jake was late. Very late. Jake burst into the diner at 7:10 a.m., 10 minutes past his scheduled start time. His shirt was partially damp from the morning drizzle, his hair disheveled. The door chime rang, and instantly every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward him. The morning atmosphere at Riverbend Diner was usually noisy with chatter, the sizzle of frying pans, and the aroma of toast and freshly brewed coffee. But right now, everything suddenly went silent. Behind the register, Shane Bowers was waiting. The diner's manager, 40 years old, hair slicked back to a glossy sheen, his black suit always perfectly pressed. His hard features looked even colder than usual. "Palmer," Shane called his name, his voice loud enough for the entire diner to hear. "Do you own a watch?" Jake swallowed, trying to steady the tremor in his voice. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bowers. My car broke down and—" "I don't care," Shane cut him off, stepping out from behind the counter. His black leather shoes clicked against the tiled floor, each step like a sentence being handed down. "You think your time is more valuable than our customers' time?" "No, sir, but—" "But what?" Shane held out a hand, his voice rising. A few customers at nearby tables turned to look. "You're late. That's the only fact I need." Jake felt his face burn. He glanced around the diner. Colt Ramsey, the cook, stood frozen by the stove, still holding the stirring spoon, but not daring to move. Emma Briggs, the morning shift waitress, stood in a corner, her face pale, eyes full of worry, but silent. "Mr. Bowers," Jake tried to keep his voice calm, "I'm truly sorry. Last night, I helped a man who was stranded in the rain, brought him home. This morning, my car—" "Oh, that's wonderful," Shane sneered. "So you're a hero now, Palmer? Very admirable. But do you know what isn't admirable? Abandoning your job for some touching story." Jake bit his lip. "I didn't abandon it. I was only—" "10 minutes," Shane interjected. "In that time, we had 3 tables waiting. Emma had to serve everyone alone. And you? Where were you? Playing the Good Samaritan?" The customers began exchanging looks. An older woman sitting at a corner table whispered to her companion, "Poor guy." But no one spoke up. Shane turned back to the counter and grabbed a sheet of paper. "Do you have any idea how important today is, Palmer?" Jake shook his head, a sense of dread building inside him. "Today, the actual owner of Riverbend Diner will be visiting," Shane said, his voice icy. "He's owned this place since last year, but has never come by. And now, for the first time, he wants to see how the diner runs. I need everything perfect. Perfect." Shane stepped closer to Jake, lowering his voice, though it was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "And you think I'm going to let some chronically late, irresponsible guy like you ruin my first impression on the owner?" "Mr. Bowers, please give me a chance," Jake said, his voice almost pleading. 4 years. I've worked here for 4 years. I've never skipped a shift without notice, never complained. This is the first time "The first time is also the last time," Shane cut him off. He pointed to the apron hanging behind the counter. "Take off the apron. You're fired." The words hit like a bolt of lightning. Jake stood frozen, unable to believe his ears. "You can't—" "I can, and I already did," Shane said coolly, turning back to the counter. "Hand over the apron, then get out of my diner." Inside the diner, not a sound. The sizzling from the pan had stopped. Even the background music seemed to fall silent. Only Jake's heavy breathing and the pounding of his heart in his chest remained. Jake untied the apron, his hands trembling. He laid it on the counter, trying to keep his composure even as he felt shattered inside. 4 years. 4 years of hard work, sweat, smiles for customers, and extra late-night shifts for a bit more pay. All gone in an instant. "I hope you find another job, Palmer," Shane said with a fake sympathetic tone. "But a word of advice? Next time, care more about your job than about playing hero." Jake didn't respond. He turned and walked away, each step heavy. As he passed the tables, some customers looked at him with pity. Others quickly looked away. Emma stood in the corner, eyes brimming with tears, but she didn't dare say a word. The door chime rang as Jake stepped outside. The drizzle was still falling. Cincinnati's Monday morning sky was gray and cold. Jake stood on the sidewalk, looking back at the diner through the glass window. He saw Shane laughing and saying something to Colt, looking satisfied, as if firing someone made him feel more powerful. Jake wiped the water from his face. Or were those tears? He wasn't sure. All he knew was that he had just lost his job, lost his only source of income. And Lydia. What would Lydia eat next week? How would he pay the rent? He started walking, shoulders slumped, dragging his feet along the wet pavement. He didn't realize that across the street, a black sedan was parked quietly, and the man inside was watching everything. Franklin Spencer's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his teeth clenched. He had seen it all. Seen how Shane Bowers humiliated Jake in front of everyone. I saw how no one spoke up for him. I saw Jake walk out like a broken man. Franklin looked up at the sign above the diner. Riverbend Diner. He smiled faintly. A cold, determined smile. "So, this is where you work," he murmured. "And this is how they treat you." He checked his watch. 12:30 p.m. Right on time. Franklin Spencer had owned Riverbend Diner for a year, having bought it from the previous owner as a small investment in his vast portfolio. He had never visited, leaving management in the hands of Shane Bowers, a man with an impressive track record in terms of numbers. But now, Franklin realized numbers weren't everything. He dialed a number. "Nolan, it's me. I need you at Riverbend Diner. Immediately. Bring a hidden camera, recording equipment, and get ready to investigate a man named Shane Bowers. I want to know everything." He ended the call and looked back at the diner. "You saved me last night, Jake," Franklin said to himself. "Now it's my turn." And with that, Franklin Spencer stepped out of the car, adjusted his tie, and walked into Riverbend Diner. The show was about to begin. The door chime rang as Franklin Spencer stepped into Riverbend Diner at exactly 12:30 p.m. The midday sunlight streamed through the windows, casting golden patches of light across the glossy tiled floor. The smell of toasted bread, bacon, and coffee filled the air. The diner was fairly crowded at that hour. Lunchtime customers, office workers, truck drivers, students sat at their tables, chatting animatedly. The clink of plates, bursts of laughter, the lively ambiance of a successful eatery. But when Franklin walked in, something shifted. He was not the kind of man who blended into a crowd. Tall, neatly combed silver hair, a charcoal-tailored suit, polished leather shoes. The way he walked carried a quiet confidence, unshowy, yet impossible to overlook. Shane Bowers, who had been checking receipts behind the counter, looked up. His eyes lit up when he recognized the special guest he had been notified about. "Mr. Spencer!" Shane hurried over, his smile wide like a manager greeting an important business partner. "Welcome to Riverbend Diner. What an honor." Franklin gave a small nod but didn't smile. His eyes swept across the diner, into the kitchen where Colt was flipping pancakes, toward Emma serving a table near the window, into each corner as if assessing every detail. "Everything looks clean," Franklin said calmly. "And busy." "Yes, sir," Shane nodded enthusiastically. We always maintain the highest standards. Efficient, professional, no mistakes. No mistakes? Franklin repeated, emphasizing the words slightly. Interesting. Shane didn't catch the undertone. Yes, sir. I run a tight operation. I don't allow anyone to damage your reputation. Franklin walked slowly to the counter, running his fingers lightly across the polished chrome surface. Speaking of that, I heard someone was fired this morning. Shane stiffened, but regained his composure quickly. Ah, yes, Jake Palmer. He's always late, lacks discipline. I can't let someone like that ruin the diner's image, especially on the day of your visit. How late was he? Franklin asked, still calm, but there was something sharper in his tone. 10 minutes, sir. But in business, time is— I know what time is, Franklin cut in, his voice a touch colder. Jake Palmer. How long has he worked here? Shane hesitated. 4 years, sir. 4 years, Franklin repeated. And this was his first time being late? Shane swallowed. Not exactly. I mean, maybe there have been a few times. Yes or no? Franklin asked directly, looking him in the eye. All right, maybe this was the first, Shane admitted, voice trembling slightly. But rules are rules, sir. I can't make exceptions. Franklin nodded slowly, then walked around the diner. He stopped at the counter where Colt was preparing a dish. You're the cook? Franklin asked. Colt Ramsey, a big man with a beard and hands scarred from years in the kitchen, nodded. Yes, sir. Colt Ramsey. Jake Palmer. Do you know him? Colt glanced at Shane, then back at Franklin. Yes, sir. Jake is— he's the best here. Shane jumped in quickly. Colt is exaggerating, sir. Jake is just— I'm speaking to Colt, Franklin said firmly. Shane fell silent instantly. Colt swallowed and continued. Jake never complains, always shows up on time. He treats customers better than anyone, always smiling even when he's exhausted. This morning wasn't fair to him. Not fair? Shane snapped, voice rising. Colt, you'd better watch what you— That's enough, Franklin said. Not loudly, but with enough weight that Shane shut his mouth at once. He turned toward Emma, who stood in the corner holding a small bouquet. And you? What do you think of Jake Palmer? Emma, the young girl with neatly tied brown hair and red, tearful eyes, looked down at the floor. Jake is the best person I've ever worked with. He taught me everything when I started. He always shielded me when customers were harsh. Shane tried to intervene. Sir, everything they say is emotional nonsense. Numbers matter. And— Franklin turned toward him, his stare icy enough to silence him. Call Jake Palmer back, Franklin said. Shane's mouth fell open. Sir? Call Jake Palmer back, right now. But sir, I just fired him. And I'm asking you to call him back, Franklin repeated, his tone no longer patient. Or do you need me to explain it more clearly? Shane gulped, sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Yes, sir. I'll call him right away. Jake was sitting in his truck, his hands trembling around his phone. He had just called Mrs. Wilson, telling her he might pick Lydia up late today because he needed to look for a job urgently. The kind older woman reassured him that it was fine. But Jake was anything but fine. His mind swirled with images of unpaid bills, an almost empty fridge, and Lydia's shoes, now too small, he still couldn't afford to replace. His phone rang. Unknown number. Jake hesitated, then answered. Jake Palmer? Shane Bowers' voice came through, void of arrogance this time. Instead, he sounded anxious. Yes? You need to come back to the diner. Right now. Jake frowned. You just fired me. I know, but something important has come up. Please, come back. As fast as you can. What is it? You'll know when you get here, Shane blurted before hanging up. Jake stared at his phone, confused. Was this some sick joke? Or did Shane want to humiliate him again? But then he remembered Shane's tone, not commanding, but pleading. Jake started the truck. He had nothing left to lose anyway. 15 minutes later, he stood at the door of Riverbend Diner. His heart hammered. His hand gripped the handle. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The chime rang. Everyone in the diner looked up. Jake walked in, eyes scanning the room, confused by the tense look on Shane's face, and by the presence of a stranger. No. Wait. Not a stranger. It was Franklin Spencer. Jake froze. The old man from last night, the man he rescued in the storm, was now standing there in a refined suit, carrying himself with total authority. No trace of the helpless elderly man remained. Before Jake stood a powerful businessman. "Jake," Franklin smiled lightly and stepped forward. "Thank you for coming back." Mr. Spencer?" Jake stammered. "What are you doing here?" Franklin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned to face the entire diner. His voice rang out clear and firm. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Franklin Spencer, the owner of Riverbend Diner." A wave of whispers rippled through the diner. Customers exchanged surprised looks. Emma's mouth dropped open. Colt dropped his spoon in the kitchen. And Jake? His head spun. You're the owner?" "That's right," Franklin nodded. "And last night, you rescued me when I was stranded in the rain. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care whether I was rich or poor. You simply saw a human being who needed help." Franklin turned toward Shane, his eyes icy enough to cut glass. "And this morning, you fired that man because he was 10 minutes late, after a night spent helping a stranger." Shane's face drained of color. "Sir, I didn't know. If I had known it was you—" "If you had known, would you have acted differently?" Franklin asked sharply. "That is precisely the problem, Mr. Bowers. You only respect people with power, not people who deserve respect." Shane opened his mouth, but no words came out. Franklin stepped beside Jake and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Jake Palmer, you reminded me of something I nearly forgot in the business world. Selfless kindness, unconditional decency. Therefore, I am making this decision publicly." He turned to the entire diner. "Jake Palmer is reinstated immediately. Furthermore, starting today, he is co-manager of Riverbend Diner." The diner fell silent for a heartbeat. Then, from the kitchen, Colt began clapping. Emma joined in. Then the customers. A warm, genuine applause filled the room. Jake stood there in disbelief. Tears stung his eyes. He blinked them back. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Franklin smiled. "You did what was right. I'm just returning the favor." Shane stood frozen, pale as paper. And what about me, sir?" Franklin looked at him and sighed. "You'll remain manager. But from now on, you will learn to respect people, not just numbers. And if you ever repeat what you did today—" He left the sentence hanging, but the message was unmistakable. Shane bowed his head. "Yes, sir." And with that, a new chapter for Riverbend Diner began. 3 weeks had passed since the day Franklin Spencer announced that Jake Palmer was co-manager. Riverbend Diner still opened its doors, still served breakfast, lunch, and dinner as usual. But the atmosphere inside was completely different. Jake was sitting in the small room behind the kitchen, the office that previously only Shane was allowed to step into. An old wooden desk, a computer, and drawers full of receipts and ledgers. Jake had never imagined there would be a day he'd sit here, not as an employee being called in to be reprimanded, but as someone with the authority to make decisions. But along with that authority came responsibility, and it felt heavier than he had expected. He flipped through each financial report, his eyes lingering on the columns for revenue, expenses, and profit. Something wasn't right. A few expense items had spiked suddenly over the past 3 months with no clear reason. The cost of supplies was higher than average, and some cash transactions were not fully recorded. Jake frowned and wrote down the irregularities in a small notebook. It could just be accounting errors. It could also be busy. Jake looked up. Shane Bowers was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, a strained smile on his face. Ever since Franklin's decision, Shane had become different. He no longer shouted, no longer acted like he was above everyone else. Instead, there was a cold, icy silence about him. The kind of silence that was more unsettling than anger. "No, I'm just looking over some reports," Jake said, closing the notebook. "Do you need anything?" "Just wanted to remind you we have a staff meeting at 3, Shane replied, his tone flat, but his eyes anything but friendly. "Franklin will be joining via video call." "Got it, I know. Thanks." Shane still didn't leave right away. He stood there for a few more seconds, looking at Jake with unreadable eyes, then finally turned and walked off. Jake watched him go, a vague sense of unease stirring in his chest. That evening, Jake got home earlier than usual. Lydia was curled up on the sofa, coloring in a drawing book, her golden ponytail bouncing to the rhythm of the song she was humming in her head. "Daddy's home!" Lydia sprang up, ran over, and wrapped herself around his legs. "I missed you so much." Jake bent down and lifted his daughter into his arms, breathing in the familiar scent of children's shampoo. "I missed you, too," he laughed. "How was school today?" "It was great! I got an A on my art test," Lydia squealed and tugged him over to the fridge. On the door, her drawing was stuck up with a magnet. A family of 3, a dad, a little girl, and a faint figure beside them with the clumsy words, "Mom in Heaven." Jake's heart clenched. 2 years had passed, but Lydia still thought about her mother every single day. "It's beautiful, honey," Jake said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Daddy?" Lydia suddenly looked straight at him, her clear blue eyes searching. "Are you happy?" Jake paused. "Why do you ask that?" "Because you look really tired. You stay up late every night. I hear you sigh a lot." Jake sat down and pulled Lydia to sit facing him, their eyes level. "As long as I have you, I'm happy, Lydia." "But are you sad?" Jake stayed quiet for a moment, then chose to be honest. "Yes, sometimes I'm sad. But every time I look at you, I feel strong again." Lydia threw her arms around his neck. "Daddy is the best person in the whole world." In that small apartment, wrapped in the tight hug of a 6-year-old girl, Jake suddenly felt like the richest man alive. He didn't know that at that very moment, out in the parking lot of Riverbend Diner, Shane Bowers was sitting in his car, staring into the diner through the dark glass. Inside his mind, a shadowy plan was slowly taking shape. On Wednesday morning, Jake arrived at the diner early as usual. He opened the cash register to check the previous night's takings, a new habit Franklin had asked both managers to do together so they could compare records. But after counting for a short while, Jake stopped. Money was missing. Exactly $150. He counted again. Once, twice, 3 times. The number didn't change. The cash in the register didn't match the written record. "Is something wrong?" Emma walked over, carrying a tray of coffee cups. She had noticed the tension on his face. "There's money missing," Jake said quietly. $150. Emma frowned. "Maybe someone gave the wrong change last night." "Maybe," Jake nodded, but his unease remained. Did you notice anything strange last night? No, everything was normal, Emma tried to recall. Oh, but Shane stayed late after I left. He said he had to finish some reports. Jake made a mental note of that. He didn't want to jump to conclusions about anyone, but… I'll check the cameras, Jake said softly. For now, don't mention this to anyone, okay? Emma nodded. Jake went up to the office and turned on the surveillance system. Riverbend Diner had 3 cameras, one on the register, one in the kitchen, and one at the entrance. He rewound the footage from the previous night, starting around 10 p.m., when the diner closed. 10:15 p.m. Emma and Colt finished cleaning and left one after another. 10:30 p.m. Only Shane remained in the diner. 10:45 p.m. Shane stood at the register, opened the till. He pulled out a stack of bills, counted them, then stuffed them straight into his jacket pocket. Jake paused the video. His heart pounded. Shane was stealing. But Jake knew one recording wasn't enough. He needed more evidence. One incident could be brushed off as a mistake. He needed the full picture. Jake called Franklin, not from the office, but from the parking lot, where no one could overhear. Franklin, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. On the other end, Franklin's voice was still calm, but clearly focused. What's going on, Jake? Cash is missing, and I have video of Shane taking money from the register. There was a brief silence. Then Franklin exhaled slowly. Are you sure? I watched it 3 times. It's him. All right, Franklin said. Don't do anything yet. Don't confront him, and don't mention this to anyone. I'll send someone down. And Jake? Yes? Be careful. If Shane senses you're investigating him, he might do something reckless. The call ended. Jake stood in the freezing Cincinnati morning air of the parking lot, a thick fog of unease settling around him. 2 days later, a man walked into Riverbend Diner at 11 a.m. He was tall, with short-cropped hair, wearing a black leather jacket and jeans. At first glance, he looked like any other passerby, but the way he watched everything, the sharp, steady eyes, the deliberate movements, the way he noted every detail, made it clear he was not just a casual customer. He chose a corner table, ordered a cup of coffee and a sandwich. The whole time he quietly observed. The way Shane moved around, how he spoke to staff, how often he touched the cash register. This was Nolan Gray, the private investigator Franklin had hired. Franklin had already told Jake about him. Jake knew Nolan was there, but no one else in the diner knew anything. Not even Shane. Nolan stayed for 2 hours before leaving, but he didn't go home. That evening he came back and sat somewhere else. The tiny camera hidden in his jacket recorded every movement, every gesture. On Friday evening, Franklin arranged to meet Jake at a nearby cafe. Nolan was there as well. We've got enough, Nolan said, opening his laptop. On the screen were a series of videos and stills. Shane opening the register, taking money, altering numbers, changing records. Not once, but at least 8 times in the past 3 months. The total amount he's taken is estimated at over $3,000, Nolan concluded. Jake let out a long breath, a mix of anger and disappointment. His salary isn't low. Why would he do this? Franklin shook his head slightly. Not everyone steals because they need money, Jake. Some do it out of greed. Some do it for the feeling of power. Shane got used to controlling everything here. When you became co-manager, he lost part of that control. This is how he tried to take it back. So what do we do now? Jake asked. Franklin looked at Nolan, then back at Jake. We confront him, but not in private, in front of the whole staff. I've already called the police. Jake swallowed. When? Monday morning, Franklin replied. "I'll fly to Cincinnati. We're going to put an end to this." The weekend passed under a silence stretched tight like a drawn wire. Jake kept working as usual, forcing himself to act as if nothing had changed so Shane wouldn't grow suspicious. But every time he saw the man, his fake smile, the way he talked to customers like he owned the place, anger surged up inside him. On Sunday night, Jake could barely sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning with scenarios. How would Shane react? Would he confess? Or deny everything and try to pin it back on Jake? A soft knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. "Dad?" Lydia's voice came. "Come in, sweetheart." She opened the door, clutching her teddy bear, shuffling over to the bed. "I can't sleep." Jake lifted the blanket. "Come here." Lydia slid in beside him. "You're worried about work, aren't you?" "Yeah, a little," Jake admitted. "Because of your job?" "Yeah, that too." Lydia was quiet for a moment, then said, "Mom used to say that when you're worried, you just have to look up at the stars and remember she's up there watching you." Jake's chest tightened. She was right. She's watching you too, isn't she? Jake gave a sad smile. "I'm sure she is." The two of them lay still like that until Lydia drifted off, still hugging her teddy tightly. Jake looked at his daughter and whispered softly, "Sarah, do you see this? I'm trying to do the right thing. For her. For our family." In the darkness, a delicate sense of peace seemed to settle over the room, as if someone were gently placing a hand on his shoulder, saying, "Keep going. It's going to be all right." Monday morning was coming, and with it, the moment everything would change. Monday morning, Riverbend Diner opened like any other day. Customers came and went, placed orders, ate breakfast, and chatted noisily. No one knew that in just a few hours, everything in the diner would be turned upside down. Jake arrived at 6:30, earlier than usual. In his pocket was a USB drive containing all the video evidence. Franklin would arrive at 9. The police had already been notified and would show up at 9:30. Shane appeared at 7. He greeted Jake perfunctorily, then went straight into the office, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Colt and Emma arrived afterward. Colt glanced quickly at Jake's face and clearly saw the tension there. "You okay?" Colt asked quietly. "I will be," Jake replied. "Today is going to be a long day." At 8:45, Franklin Spencer walked into the diner. He wore a neat gray suit, his expression grave and serious. Walking beside him was Nolan Gray, holding a briefcase. Shane, who was standing at the counter, jumped when he saw Franklin. "Mr. Spencer, I didn't know you were coming today," Shane said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I didn't announce it," Franklin replied, his tone cold. "Jake, call all the staff out here, right now." 5 minutes later, the entire Riverbend Diner staff, Colt, Emma, and 2 part-time employees had gathered in the service area. The customers in the diner sensed the heavy atmosphere, gradually stopped eating, and turned to watch. Franklin stood in the middle, Jake beside him. Shane faced them, his face gradually turning pale. "I'm here today to deal with a serious matter," Franklin began. "For the past 3 months, Riverbend Diner has repeatedly lost cash in mysterious ways. At first, we thought it was an accounting error. But, after investigating, we discovered this is not an error." Shane swallowed hard. "Sir, what exactly are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Franklin said flatly. "I'm accusing. Shane Bowers, you have embezzled more than $3,000 in cash from this diner's register over the past 3 months." The air seemed to freeze. Emma let out a sharp breath. Colt stood rooted to the spot. Shane stepped back, his face chalk white. "That's slander!" Shane shouted. "I would never!" Nolan? Franklin nodded. Nolan Gray opened his laptop and turned the screen toward everyone. The video played, Shane opening the register, pulling out money, stuffing it into his pocket. Then another video. Then another. Everything was clear, sharp, and impossible to deny. Sweat rolled down Shane's forehead. That's fake. Jake staged it to frame me. Staged it? Franklin repeated, his voice icy. Then how do you explain your fingerprints on these bills? He opened a clear evidence bag. Inside were bills that had been marked beforehand. We marked a number of bills in the register last week. And last night, you were the one who took them. Shane shook his head frantically. No, that's not what happened. We also checked your bank statements, Nolan added. The cash deposits do not match the legal income you reported. You tried to hide it, but not well enough. Shane whipped around to glare at Jake, his eyes filled with hatred. This is all because of you. Before you showed up, I was the only manager here. Then he promotes you, some nobody waiter, and makes me lose face in front of everyone. So that means I deserve to have you steal from me? Jake asked, his voice calm but pained. I always respected you. I never wanted to take your place. But you chose this path yourself. Shane opened his mouth, but no words came out. The door to the diner opened. 2 police officers stepped inside. Shane Bowers, one officer called out. Shane turned and saw them, and it was as if all the strength drained from his body. His shoulders slumped. You are under arrest for theft and falsifying financial records, the officer said, taking out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed as they locked around Shane's wrists. He turned his head to look at Jake one last time. You think you've won, don't you? You're just some guy who got lucky. Without Franklin, you're nothing. Jake looked him straight in the eyes. Maybe that's true. But I don't need power to be a decent human being. And that you never understood. Shane was led outside. The door chime rang softly again as it closed behind him. This time, for good. Inside the diner, silence stretched on for a few more breaths. Then Colt was the first to clap. Emma followed. A few customers joined in. The applause rose, not the kind of applause for show, but the kind that belongs to justice. Franklin stepped up beside Jake and placed a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing. Not everyone has the courage to face the truth. Jake nodded, his throat tightening. Thank you, Franklin. For everything. No. Franklin shook his head. I should be thanking you. You reminded me what truly matters. They shook hands, not just as owner and manager, but as friends, as 2 people standing together on the side of what's right. Spring returned to Cincinnati, cherry blossoms blooming along the banks of the Ohio River, the rows of trees softening into gentler colors. Riverbend Diner was now a far cry from what it had been 6 months earlier. Outside, a new sign had been hung. Riverbend Diner, where kindness is served. Inside, the space had been refurbished, brighter, warmer. On the walls were framed photos of staff and customers, smiles, everyday moments filled with meaning. Jake stood behind the counter. He no longer wore the old server's uniform, but a simple shirt and neat slacks. His hair was trimmed cleanly, and his eyes no longer held that dull exhaustion. Emma sat at a corner table, doing her homework, occasionally looking up to smile at him. Thanks to Franklin's help, Jake had been able to send his daughter to a better private school, one where they encouraged and nurtured her artistic talent. Emma Briggs was now the shift lead, training 2 new employees. She was quick, confident, and smiled much more than before. Colt was still in the kitchen, but he now had an assistant, no longer forced to shoulder everything alone like he once did. That evening, Franklin stopped by the diner. He sat at his usual table, ordered a cup of coffee and a sandwich as always. Jake brought the food out himself and sat down across from him. "Revenue is up 40% compared to 6 months ago," Jake reported. "More regulars are coming back. We've also gained quite a few new 5-star reviews on Yelp." Franklin smiled. "I already know, but what matters more is, are people happy?" Jake looked around the diner. Emma was chatting and laughing with customers. Colt was working while whistling in the kitchen. In the corner over there, his daughter Lydia was busy sketching another new picture. "Yes," Jake said softly. "Everyone is much happier than before." "Then that's enough," Franklin replied. They sat in silence for a while, sipping their coffee, listening to the distant sound of the Ohio River flowing gently outside. "Franklin," Jake spoke up, "there's something I've always wondered. That night, in the rain, did you know I worked at Riverbend Diner?" Franklin shook his head. "No. Back then, I only knew you were a good man who stopped his car. The fact that you worked at this diner was just a beautiful coincidence." "A coincidence?" Jake smiled. "Or fate?" "Maybe a bit of both," Franklin replied. "But I believe this: when people do something kind, the universe will find a way to bring it back to them." A few weeks later, Jake stood outside the diner on a late evening. It was drizzling again, just like the night he first met Franklin. But this time, his heart was no longer weighed down with anxiety. An old car sputtered and died at the side of the road. An older man stepped out, bewildered, looking around. His phone had no signal. Jake didn't need long to think. He stepped out from under the awning and walked toward him. "Do you need some help, sir?" The man turned, slightly startled. "My car just died. I don't know what to do." Jake smiled. "Get in my truck. I'll drive you somewhere safe." As the vehicle rolled forward in the rain, Jake suddenly remembered Franklin's words. "Kindness doesn't need a reason. It only needs to be done." 6 months later, a short article appeared in the Cincinnati Enquirer. "A small diner with a big philosophy. Riverbend Diner becomes a community symbol." Riverbend Diner, located by the Ohio River, is not only a place that serves good food, but also a testament to the power of kindness. Run by Jake Palmer and Franklin Spencer, the diner has become a place people come to not just to eat, but to feel the warmth of community. When asked about the secret to success, Jake Palmer simply replied, "We treat people as human beings, not just customers. That's it." And on another rainy afternoon, on another road, someone else stopped their car to help a stranger. The circle of kindness kept on turning. The story of Jake Palmer and Franklin Spencer is not just about a single father being pulled back from the edge. It is a story about how one very small act of kindness can transform an entire life, not only for the person who receives it, but for the one who gives it. In a world that is becoming colder and more hurried, people easily forget that humans still need humans. That kindness is not a sign of weakness, but a mark of strength. Jake reminded Franklin of the human side behind the numbers. Franklin gave Jake a second chance, and together, they created a place where kindness is not exploited, but honored. That place is Riverbend Diner, and it could also be the story of all of us. Finally, if you've stayed with me until now, thank you so much for spending your time on Jake and Franklin's story. If you believe, like I do, that even one small act of kindness can change the course of a life, then please don't leave in silence. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. If this story touched you, please like the video and share it with someone you think needs to hear it. And before you click away, leave me a comment. Has someone ever helped you on a really bad day? I'll read each and every comment. See you in the next story.